Hey, good morning. I promise that we will not do that. But this is an exciting time to be a part of what God is doing here at Awaken. As Jeff said, next week we'll celebrate 4 years. And I remember when the church was 3 of us in a living room, and then it was 12 of us total, not 12 people greeting, but 12 of us total in a movie theater. And then it's amazing. Over those years, I was actually reflecting this week. We have seen over 30 people make decisions to follow Christ. That's incredible, by the way. Those are people that have gone from, as Scripture says, from death to life. Those are people that have radically seen life change, and some of you are those people. Over the course of those 4 years, we have seen 25 to 30 families sent out all over the world. That, again, is incredible because those people are having an impact with the gospel worldwide. I actually was talking to a guy this week that is stationed in the Bahamas. How many of you military? How many military? How do you get stationed in the Bahamas? I'd like to sign up for that gig. But anyways, he's stationed in the Bahamas, came to Christ through this ministry. And as I was talking to him this week, he told me, he said, I was struggling a little bit in my faith. Brand new believer, right? Less than a year old. And he said, so what I decided to do was to start a Bible study and try to reach my friends. I figured it would challenge me. Isn't that incredible? That challenges me. I don't know about you. It challenges me. Talked to another family. Some of you guys may remember Nathan and Estelle. They are actually stationed in Japan. And Estelle actually speaks, I believe, Japanese, which is pretty cool. And she is pouring into the lives of women over there in Japan. And he is actually floating around to different ships. He does cinematography for the Navy. And he's having a lot of impact within guys' lives, guys and ladies, of the ships that he comes across. And so those are just some of the things that God is doing here. And I'm excited that we're able to celebrate 4 years next year, or next week. Jeff really messed me up. I'm excited for us to celebrate that next week. I would encourage you to be here as we do that. Invite family and friends to come join you. And as Jeff said as well, I would encourage you to, if you have not been baptized, to think about being baptized. It is really that point where you put out publicly and say, I follow Christ. And it's no more fitting than the series that we're in called Follow Me. And last week we talked about what it looks like for us to follow Christ. And the command he gave when he came was not to behave a certain way or to believe certain things. Jesus said, just follow me. And we talked about a guy named Matthew and how Matthew probably didn't behave a certain way that we would think, or how Matthew probably did not believe certain things that you would think that he would believe. But he just started to follow Jesus. Jesus said, follow me, and he started to follow him. And Jesus really it was less of a game, we said, of Jesus says, like as we play Simon Says, and more of the idea that Jesus says, identify with me, and I will identify with you. And so that's kind of the the foundation for where we build off this week. And I have noticed something. You tend to be able to tell a lot by how somebody dresses, right? Is that fair to say? You can tell a lot by how somebody dresses. For example, I remember, well, even now, you can tell a local from a non-local in Virginia Beach. Is that true? Can you tell a difference? My family and I went down to the ocean front. I don't know, it was a warm day like maybe 2 weeks ago. We haven't had many of them, have we? We went down, the kids were playing in the sand and on the playground. And, we're dressed in jackets, right? Well, you can always tell the locals from the non-locals because the locals literally were running around in bikinis and were wearing jackets. I want to test a hypothesis. How many of you are from, like, you were born, you were raised, you are literal Virginia Beachers? Okay, some of you. That's actually a good amount, maybe half. All right, I have a question. How many of you that are from here, born here, Virginia Beach is home, don't like the ocean? That tests my hypothesis. Like half of you that are from here don't like the ocean. Why is that? I don't understand that. Sharks? Really? Sharks. Sharks is the reason you don't like the ocean. I'll tell you, I've been in there quite a bit since I've been here the last 5 years now. I have not seen a shark. They saw you. They saw me. Okay. But you can tell a lot by, I believe, how somebody dresses. In fact, down at the ocean front, when I was not a local, when I went down there, I was not a local. I was not here yet. I didn't even think that I would be living in Virginia Beach. We were just actually visiting here on a missions trip. And I remember being down there. And if you haven't noticed, I'm like as white can be. Okay? I am two colors. I'm white or red. There's no in between. Anybody else, you're white or red? Yeah. That's me. And my lineage is like Irish and Welsh. And so the sun doesn't shine in either of those places of the world. And so people can tell when I go down there, okay, this guy, now they can tell that I'm from here because I kind of put on the sunscreen and I make sure I wear a t-shirt and I'm strapped up with a hat. You know, I'm trying to make sure the sun doesn't hit me, right? But before I moved here, I actually was the guy that went down to the beach, took off my shirt, and put nothing on, thinking, oh, this is nothing, right? How many of you guys did that when you first moved here? Some of you? I did that. And I walked away that day with a sunburn that made me sick for 3 days. Literally, I remember peeling off skin that it was actually kind of cool looking back. It was like that big off my chest. Isn't that awesome? Yeah, it was actually put into a scrapbook. Oh, ooh, yeah, right. But my point is, you can tell a lot by how somebody dresses, right? I have some pictures here that I think will prove what I'm trying to say here. You can tell a lot by how somebody dresses. Can we pull those up? You have Redskins fans on the right. Yeah, that was kind of weak for being in Redskin country. And then you have my team, the Cleveland Browns, on the right. Your left. Or no, you're right, my left. And yeah, they have not won since 1964. So you can tell a lot just by those two things, right? The look on this guy's face, kind of what he's wearing, like droopy ears and everything. And then you can tell these guys are probably coming off a hot wind streak, right? What about the next picture? Some of you, this is in your parents' scrapbook. Maybe others of you, this was your scrapbook. You can tell a lot by what somebody wears. The next one. For some of you, you guys grew up in this era, and you actually have pictures of wearing clothes that look like this. I won't ask for any identification today. That is not an ad from Old Navy, by the way. Okay. The next picture. Somebody help me understand. I guess they have Smurf Day. And it's like a world record, 5,000 people, almost 5,000 people, like 4,800 and something, dressed up as Smurfs all around the world. I don't know what that says about people, but it says something. What about the next one? I, I don't know what it says when you wear your own finger, but this guy obviously wore his own finger. If you can do that trick, I don't want to see it. Next one. This is kind of cool. You can tell a lot. Like, what's this group here? What do they worship? Yeah, Buddha. These are Buddhists, right? Actually, I don't know if you can see from here, but one of the guys, like maybe 2 or 3 rows back, is kind of funny. He's wearing sunglasses. A hip Buddha worshiper. And this guy, can you guys read that T-shirt? 100% randomly searched at the following airports. And he has a map there that shows all the airports. Do you guys have any idea what this guy worships? Yeah, he's a Sikh, absolutely. It's a very increasingly growing religion within the world. The next picture, again, you can tell a lot by what somebody wears. This guy, a big John 3:16 T-shirt, and then this guy over here, one of those hell and brimstone guys on the corner of the street that a lot of us do not like to associate with. My point that I'm trying to make is that we can tell a lot by somebody with how they dress. And as we talk about that, Jesus kind of commanded us, if you look in John 13:34, John 13:34, he says, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples if you" what? Love one another, right? You know, we talked last week about Matthew. And I picture Jesus saying to Matthew, I want you, Matthew, to show kindness to other people as I have shown you kindness. You know, as when Peter just kind of wanted to spit on you, and Peter didn't even want you to come join our tribe, and as Peter wanted to go get his buddy and say, hey, let my buddy come. I don't want Matthew to come. I picture Jesus saying to Matthew, I want you to love people as I have loved you. I picture Jesus saying to Nathanael, one of the other disciples, that I want you, Nathanael, to love people as I have loved you. I want you, Nathanael, to be patient with people as I have been patient with you. Because if you recall, Nathanael kind of said, hey, what good thing can come out of Nazareth? That's like somebody saying to you, is there anything good that comes out of Virginia Beach? No, I don't think so. And that was Nathanael, and Jesus showed him patience. And so Jesus, in return, is telling them, love one another as I have loved you. Show patience as I have shown you patience. Another situation, Jesus is teaching his disciples, and he tells them the idea, he says, you will eat my body and drink my blood type conversation. And a lot of guys are looking at him. Some guys are taking off and leaving and saying, whoa, I'm not dealing with this. The disciples are sitting there, and Jesus is trying to teach them that his body will be crushed. His body will become a ransom. It's going to be a sacrifice for their sin, for their walking away from God, right? But he, I believe, is telling the disciples then in this verse to love one another. He's reminding them, remember how I was patient with you, and I helped you come along and understand. Love as I have loved you, right? And so today I want to talk about what it means for us to clothe ourselves, what it means for us to not wear funny t-shirts, to not put weird license plates on our vehicles, to not have to wear a hat that says who we are. And I don't want to knock anybody that does that, but I want to say there's more to following Christ than what I literally put on. And that God tells us through his word that as we follow Jesus, there are certain things that we should automatically put on, certain things that we should be wearing if we are following Christ. And that's what I want us to talk about this morning. Because we have a tendency, those that have been a part of a church for a little while have a tendency to care more about discipline than discipleship. We may be very disciplined in reading the Bible, so many times a week. We may be very disciplined in how often we may come and worship. We may be very disciplined in some other things that we do to follow Christ. But on the discipleship component of that, we may be very bad at loving people. And in essence, that's what Jesus tells us, is if you are going to follow me, that needs to be shown by how you love people. And Paul actually breaks that down for us in Colossians. And today we're going to look at something Paul wrote, and a lot of what Paul wrote had to do with that idea of loving people. And if you remember, though, be reminded, Paul was a guy that was bent on rules and keeping rules and regulations, right? And he was all about having that discipline, having certain things done a certain way. But then there was something that happened it was a road called Damascus, as he was traveling to enforce these rules, if you will, where God struck him blind, and he was blind for several days. And then when God gave him his physical sight back, he actually also received a spiritual sight. And he was able to see kind of where he was stuck in this idea of discipline, this idea of these rules and regulations, this idea of religion, if you will, and he forgot about this idea of relationship. Now, I want to say this. I think that many of us, as we set out to follow Christ, we look at somebody like Paul, and we may know others around us that as soon as they decide to follow, there's a radical change in their life, right? But for a lot of us, I don't believe that's the case. And I think that Peter maybe is more like a lot of us. If you look at Peter through Scripture, I don't think there was a radical change in Peter's life. The moment that he decided to as Jesus invited him, follow me, I think Peter followed for a long time with a lot of doubt, with a lot of questions. I think Peter followed for a little while with not even an idea, okay, what does this even look like? What does this even mean? Where you take Peter, and that's totally opposite, I think, from Paul, where Paul, just that day, total difference, right? And so be reminded, as we said last week, that when you set out to follow Christ, don't necessarily expect there to be a radical change in your life. For many of us, that change comes over a period of time. But don't be surprised if you wake up one day and you look in the mirror and you look totally different than you maybe did a few months ago, a few years ago. Because God takes and He changes us. And that's what Paul wrote about here. It's actually in Colossians chapter 3. And Paul says in verse 12, he says, "Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved," he says, "clothe yourselves." And he goes through this list of things to clothe ourselves with. Because again, you can tell a lot by somebody by what they wear. For example, you could tell a lot about me before I got married by the way I dressed. Because when I got married, my wife taught me how to dress. Anybody else? Yeah? Exactly. And so Paul lays out a list here then of what it looks like for somebody that is following Christ, describing what they clothe themselves with, how they appear to the people around them. And I want us this morning to go through that list. He says, clothe yourselves with, the first one is compassion. Compassion. What do you tell maybe your spouse, if you think about it, or maybe somebody you're in a relationship with? You say, "I love you with what? All of my heart," right? So you're in a relationship, you say, "Hey, I love you with all of my heart." Do you know what they actually said in the Bible, they actually said, I love you with all of my guts. Or a better one than that, they said, I love you with all of my bowels. How romantic is that? You know, if I was dating my wife and we're driving somewhere and I said, sweetie, you are just so beautiful. I love you with all of my bowels. She would say, I can tell it smells. Actually, my neighbor, lady that lives across the street from us, she's probably in her 60s, maybe 70s. And I love watching her and her husband interact because I have an office at my house. And one day I'm working on some stuff. Her husband pulls into the drive. It's about 3, 4 o'clock. And she literally, this is no joke, she comes walking out of the garage and she starts pulling up her shirt, showing some of her, I won't show you, I'm like white. She starts showing some of her midriff to her husband. And I just picture her saying, I love you with all of my bowels, baby. That kind of gave me a little bit of hope that in 30 or 40 years, my wife and I will still have it going on, right? But, Billy Joel actually had a song, and it was actually, he says in that song, do as the what? The Romans do, right? You guys know that song? Anybody? Really? Oh my goodness. He was a great philosopher of our time. But that saying, do as the Romans do, right? And so what Paul is trying to explain here is that as we follow Christ, that idea of compassion is not just me saying, I love you with all of my heart, but it's that idea of, as Scripture, and I think it's very appropriate, says, I love you with all of my guts or all of my bowels. It's that idea that I love you to such a level that I can feel it. Think about it. This might be a bad example, but I'm hoping it's memorable. Last time I talked about guts with my wife was when I was puking up my guts a few weeks ago. I felt every minute of that. You feel every minute of a bowel movement, right? And so the scriptures are saying compassion is that idea of me loving somebody to a depth that I can feel it on the inside. Does that make sense? And so Paul tells us that if we clothe ourselves, if we're a follower of Christ, and we wear something, we need to wear this idea of compassion. Another one, he continues on, he says, clothe yourselves with kindness. Clothe yourselves with kindness. I would encourage you to write some of these down. Kindness is that idea that we loan our strength to someone. Think about that for a minute. We loan our strength to someone. Jesus may have said, bless others as I have blessed you. And so it's that idea that we are giving somebody out of what God has already given us. We're helping somebody out of what God has already helped us. So it's loaning your strength to somebody. I think it's very hard to be greedy and kind at the same time. And I say this out of personal conviction. When I first started, Jesus said, follow me. As I first started to follow, I didn't know certain things. I didn't probably behave certain ways, right? Over time, God changes that. But as I first started to follow, that was one area where God had to work in me, was that idea of kindness. Because I honestly, frankly, was very greedy. Because I grew up in a house, and maybe some of you as well, where I work for what I get. And I learned a very valuable principle through that. I learned to work hard, and I work very hard. But I also learned maybe a negative side of that, and that is that if you want something, just go work for it and get it. And that doesn't carry along this idea of kindness, is that God blesses us with certain things, and we're called to extend that blessing onto others, whatever that might look like. So kindness is that idea of extending our strength to somebody else's weakness. I remember how one of the things that God did to change that within my life. I remember being in seminary, and my car was broke down for about 2 months. And we were involved in a church there. And one of the guys came up to me. He knew my car had been broke down. And he said to me, he said, "Mike, what's going on with your car?" And if you know me, you'd not be surprised by my answer. I said, "I have no idea what's wrong with it. It just won't run." And he said, "Well, I can come over this afternoon and take a look at it." I said, "Hey, that'd be great. Thanks, Jim." So he came over and he figured out it was a radiator. For some of you guys, that's pretty simple. For guys like me, that's like doing heart surgery on somebody. And he looks at me and he says, "Mike, it's a radiator. I can go grab one real quick and throw it in for you, and I can have this fixed within the hour." And it was very humbling for me. I looked at Jim and I said, "Jim, I that would be great, man, but I don't have the money for a radiator." Connie was working full time. I was working full time, and I was in seminary. We were just trying to make it through. And Jim looked at me and he said, "Oh man, don't worry about it. I got it. I planned on doing that." And that day I learned something valuable about kindness. Somebody loaned me their strength. And when I moved on that day, and it wasn't like I sat and I planned out, how do I become kind? No, it was a defining moment where I was open to, but a defining moment where God said, "Let me show you kindness." And from that moment, I've said, you know what? I want to be able to extend my strength to other people too. I want to be able to help other people the way that this guy has helped me. And that is what it means to clothe yourself with kindness. Paul goes on and he says, clothe yourselves with compassion, with kindness, and then he says with humility. And we really mess this one up, don't we? Humility. We think that humility is me making myself feel worthless. We think that humility is me looking at myself in almost like this pathetic view, right? And I think that humility, I think that when we choose to look at ourselves that way, I would say that there's a level of pride even within that. I tend to believe that humility is this idea of really having an ultimate understanding of who you are. Having an accurate view of who you are. That means that you're able to say, hey, you know what? I'm good at that. I can help you with that. And so that means me being able to look at myself and saying, you know what? I'm good at this and this. And those are areas that I should really try to help and lead in. And those are areas that I should really try to hand off to other people. That should be my contribution to the community as a whole, right? That's not pride, that's humility, having an accurate view of yourself, but also being able to look at yourself and saying, you know what, I'm not so good at this and this and this. And so in these areas, I really need to lean on God, and I need to lean on other people to help me in those areas. And so humility is that idea of having an accurate understanding of who you are. And so being confident in your strengths, but also saying God has given me the ability and I give Him the glory for those strengths. But being just as confident in my weaknesses and saying, I'm just not really good at these couple things over here, and that's okay. So I need to be humble and allow others to help me in those areas and allow God to help me walk through those things. Does that make any sense? The idea of clothing ourselves in humility is not looking less at ourselves, but it's actually having a better understanding of how God created us and giving Him the glory for that understanding. Now, that's one I think we mess up all the time, is humility. So Paul says, clothe yourselves with compassion, with kindness, with humility. And he goes on, he says, clothe yourselves with gentleness. Gentleness is the idea to adjust my strength to the level of the person that I'm interacting with. It's the ability to adjust my approach accordingly to a situation. That's what gentleness is. I think of my kids. That's a great example, my kids. Are my kids as smart or as strong as I am? No. Unless you're asking my daughter about bugs. This week we were digging up in my backyard, doing some patio stuff, and my 8-year-old is back there telling me that be careful of that bug, it'll eat you, and be careful of that bug because it'll lay babies in you and you'll die. And I was like, where are you getting this stuff from? She said, I learned this in school. So I don't know what they teach in school, but my daughter knows far more about bugs than I do. And but overall, we often know more than the kids around us or the kids in our lives, right? But gentleness is that idea of adjusting my strength and my knowledge accordingly to a situation. And so even the idea of my children, I'll discipline them, right? And I discipline to try to make a course correction, to try to point them in the right direction. But I also am very aware at how often I've been having to discipline lately. And if some of you are parents of small kids, you understand what I mean. There are some seasons where it seems like you're correcting and disciplining all the time, right? But I keep an idea of how often that is. Because I don't want my kids just to see me as being somebody with power and authority in their life. I want them to see me as this relationship being much more important. And so I'll weigh and I'll say, man, you know what? I've had to discipline a lot lately. I'm just going to let some things go for a little while. Because I want to be gentle as well. I want to lower my strength, lower my ability with them to their level. And so honestly, it takes somebody who is not looking to impress others with how much they know or how strong they are, but it's somebody that is saying, the relationship is much more important to me than somebody liking me or being impressed with me. And that's the idea of gentleness. That's the idea of gentleness. Lowering my strength accordingly to the situation. Paul goes on and he says, we're to clothe ourselves then with also patience. Patience is simply just gearing back, right? Now, some of you may be high energy people. I'm a high energy person. And so, for me, there are times where my family and I will be, my kids, my wife and I will be walking through the mall, right? And I have to be very careful and cognizant of this because I will just naturally walk fast because I want to get from point A to point B, right? And so I'm walking, and the next thing I know, it's like I'm walking by myself, and I turn around, and my kids and my wife are back here, and it's like, oh man, I need to slow down my pace. I need to gear things back a little bit. And so there's an idea that's what patience is to gear ourselves back in situations to move at the same speed maybe of others that are around us. Paul goes on and he tells us we're to bear with each other. We're to forgive one another. The easiest way for me to say that is I understand more about forgiveness the more that I understand how broken I am. It's easier for me to forgive somebody when I realize how much God has had to do all these things with me. As God has had to forgive me. As I realize my brokenness. As I realize how far from God I really am at times. So Christ says, forgive as I have forgiven you. Or as we say around here, we say, forgiven people, forgive people. And there are times when I have to go to God and I have to say, God, this is a hard one. This is a hard situation for me to forgive in. And there have been those times. And I say, God, I need you to help me forgive. I need you to teach me to forgive. And God walks me through the process. Sometimes it takes a while. And Paul wraps this up and he says, this is what it means to love. Is that we are compassionate with others as Christ has been compassionate with me. We are kind to others. We lend our strength to others as Christ has lent his strength to us. We're gentle with others. As God has the power and authority to say, you know what, Mike, I'm done with you. But he chooses to be patient instead. And so he tells us, he says, be patient. Lower yourself accordingly. Lower your strength accordingly. Because I have lowered my strength accordingly. He tells us to be humble as he humbled himself to the point of death on a cross. Philippians 2. There's a great passage about that. We're to be gentle as God has been gentle with us. And patient and forgiving. I know that we can sit here and we can really ask the question, how practical is this, right? I mean, honestly, I have a lot to think about during the week, and I have a lot of things that I'm responsible for. I mean, really, how practical is this? I would make the argument that Jesus didn't come to make a point. He came to make a difference. And the church is not called, I believe, to make a point. But the church is supposed, therefore, to make a difference as well. And this idea, this series that we're going through, Follow Me, is about bringing things back to the core of what it means to follow Christ. And if you look at the core of what it means to follow Christ, it's about relationship. It's not about behaving certain ways or believing certain things. God kind of shows us certain things, and as Paul says, as we follow Christ, we should clothe ourselves with these things, and we'll start to see these things more naturally come out. And we're going to have some of these areas are going to be harder than others for us. So Paul didn't write this as kind of a list of morality. He wrote this really as poetry about being in a loving relationship. And as we follow and learn to walk in relationship with the God of the universe, it's not about the fancy t-shirts we might wear or how we might dress or look, but it's these things that end up coming out of us. And so my challenge for you as the band comes up and continues to lead us in worship is to think through this week, what does it look like for me to clothe myself in compassion, in humility, in kindness, forgiveness, in love, in patience and gentleness? And so, this being a Navy town, the Navy is known for what? Acronyms, right? I mean, I think they have an acronym for, hey, Chief, how can I go to the bathroom? And so I thought it might be corny, but maybe helpful to leave you with this acronym that I heard. Write this down. How many of you guys enjoy chick flicks? Okay, just one. One of you enjoys a chick flick. If you're a guy, you can raise your hand. I'll close my eyes so you don't lose your man card. How many of you guys have seen a PG chick flick, rated PG? Are you telling me that you watch movies that are not just PG, but you watch like PG-13 and rated R? I can't believe you guys do that. No, I'm kidding. Think about these things that I've said. Write out the word chick, flick, PG. Chick, flick, PG. And if you look in that word, it's really an acronym for what we talked about. C being what? Help me out here. C being compassion. H being humility. We're going to do it like license plates you see here, right? So there's no I. What's K? Kindness. What's F? Forgiveness. And L? Love. What's K? Kindness, because you actually probably should do that one twice. We need it a lot. What's P? What? I'm sorry? Patience. And what's G? Gentleness. So I would encourage you this week to ask ourselves, who do I need to be patient with? Who do I need to show gentleness to? How can I be kind? And allow, as we follow Christ, to allow God to clothe us in those things, so that as others look at us, they can see that we are followers of Christ, not by what we say or by what we do, but how we carry ourselves, how we clothe ourselves. Can we do that this week? If you look in your program, you're going to see a list of ways that we can do that. And I would encourage you to look through that list and say, you know what, here, I might be able to do this, or I might be able to do that, because a church within a city, that city should know us as a church that wants to make a difference. And that difference begins one person at a time. I believe by us showing these things to people. And so I would challenge us as a church to do that this week.